Hello, folks. My name is Michael Keller. I'm the Vice Provost and University Librarian at Stanford University. I'm delighted to see you joining this webinar on cybersecurity and global conflicts in the 21st century. We are delighted to be joined by Minister of Entrepreneurship and IT, Sutt from the Republic of Estonia, Andrew Grotto and Herbert, both from the Hoover Institution here at Stanford. Let me begin by mentioning that this is the first formal global conversation sponsored and organized by both the Stanford Libraries and Vabamu, a museum devoted to many wonderful things involving freedom in Tallinn, Estonia. Mr. Sutt is the Minister of Entrepreneurship and Information Technology of the Republic of Estonia. He's been that minister since the 26th of January, 2021. He is a member of the Liberal Reform Party of Estonia. Minister Sutt has over 25 years of international experience in central banking, bank restructuring, and crisis management. He was the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Estonia, worked for the European Financial Stability Facility, and represented Estonia at the executive board of the IMF. Mr. Sutt has a master's degree in economics and finance cum laude from Tartu University and has studied management at INSEAD in France. Our moderator today is Andrew Grotto, William J. Perry International Security Fellow at the Cyber Policy Center and a research fellow at the Hoover Institution, both of Stanford University. His research interests center on the national security and international economic dimensions of America's global leadership in IT innovation and its growing reliance on this innovation for its economic and social life. Our discussant today is Dr. Herbert, Senior Research Scholar for Cyber Policy and Security at the Center for International Security and Cooperation, and Hank J. Holland Fellow in Cyber Policy and Security at the Hoover Institution, both of Stanford University. His research interests relate broadly to policy-related dimensions of cybersecurity and cyberspace as instruments of national policy, and in the security dimensions of information warfare and influence operations on national security. In his opening remarks, coming soon, Minister Sutt will address some of the questions and concerns related to cybersecurity and the global conflicts of the 21st century. This will be followed by a discussion among Minister Sutt, Andy Grotto, and Herb Lynn. At the end of the event, there will be time for a Q&A session. So we welcome your feedback and questions. Please note that the chat is disabled. We welcome your questions via the Q&A button, which is on your Zoom screen in the center right. As I mentioned, this event is the first in the new series called Global Conversations, launched by the Stanford Libraries and Vabamu Freedom's House in Tallinn, Estonia. This series of talks, lectures, and seminars will focus on the benefits and fragility of freedom. Stay tuned for more information about the series and its next events, which will be coming soon. Gentlemen, over to you, starting with you, Sutt. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, hello everybody to, I guess, sunny and springy California. And thanks, Michael, for the kind introduction. Really pleased to be with you today. If there is one thing we can count as positive from COVID, it's clearly the widespread use of webinars over Zoom, Teams, Skype, or any other B2C channel. And that, I think, is really something which makes connection helpful. If there is just one sentence you can take with you from this seminar, then this is, if we talk about cyber, it's all about resilience. All about resilience, us as a society, be it here in Europe or Northern Europe, or be it on the west coast of the US or any other place in the world. But the word is really resilience, because The cyber security and cyber defense in itself is not the end. It's means to protect the society, to support the innovation, and so on. It is sort of, for me, it's another side of digital society coin, because as we move all collectively into more and more digitalized world, being secure and protected as we are in our daily lives is increasingly more important. And of course, as Michael mentioned in the intro, I'm really new kid on the block when it comes to cyber. I first encountered the topic, I would say, more in detail when I assumed the position of the minister. And then I discovered actually there is a lot of similarities compared to banking in terms of how you prepare, how you work, how you design the systems and processes in a way that you can actually come out from a stress situation relatively safely. Of course, if we look globally, then the cyber landscape has become much more hostile. It has become much more hostile already before Russia's 2022 aggression to Ukraine, which started on the Independence Day of Estonia. So there is particular link in that regard. But we saw a number of cyber attacks already before, and everybody is constantly tested. So we have really to take it collectively as a serious and important topic. And for me, what I have also discovered, one of the key aspects is to raise the awareness among the policymakers, but equally raise the awareness among the CEOs of the different companies, be it in a critical infrastructure or also SMEs and micro companies, because this is all what touches our daily lives. And as I guess most of the audience is familiar with the cyber topic, then you have of course heard about the attacks which are on the supply chain. And I think just picking one example from last year, if you recall Kasaja, then it had a huge collateral damage in a country not far from us, Sweden, where one of the largest retail supermarkets was operating in their cashier's desks, the software provided by Kasaja, and they had to close the shops for a week and even more. So that is what you see. Being completely innocent bystander, you just get caught, and you have to deal with the consequence. So that's one. And then the second example of Irish health system, which was really taken down, and then the Irish had to invest more than 100 million euros, and that bill is still counting to build it basically up again. And again, I mean, you do it and you see it in the places where you shouldn't really see these type of attacks. And then if we come to the aggression of Russia to Ukraine, I think this is sort of the toughest evidence and the toughest situation where you can see how critically important the cyber resilience is. And of course, the state-sponsored attacks, I mean, they need to be condemned, and we condemn them very strongly. And also what we see with Ukraine, the geographical distance really doesn't matter. I mean, you can be a victim of a cyber attack originated from any corner of the world, and then including in your own country if the systems have been corrupted. So the proximity really has disappeared. And another lesson, again, maybe trivial one, but still relevant. If we talk about conventional or a kinetic war, there is always some advance notice. You see the buildup of troops, repositioning of the military. In a cyber, I mean, it's pretty much invisible. You better take an assumption that somebody has already planted something into your systems, and then you know that if something happens, you have a good capability and training to restore the systems. And the same goes with, again, if we talk 21st century, we talk about fake news, or we talk about propaganda. That's also very relevant angle, particularly if we consider what Michael mentioned in the introduction. I mean, at the end, it's all about freedom equally. So we need to be really clear here. And one thing where Ukraine has been also very, very strong has been the information campaign. But in order to succeed, and then this is another point I want to stress, you need to have ICT infrastructure, including telecommunications, up and running. Otherwise, there is no cell phone coverage, no reporting from social media. And this is where Ukraine has really excelled, like they have also in the military. But sort of the cyber is, or ICT in general, it's a fabric of society. And if as we want the society to be safe in terms of traffic, in terms of energy security, the business continuity of energy supply, I mean, the same goes for cyber. And if we think how much we are going to invest globally into the digitalization, which is the right thing to do. I mean, one for making our planet greener and cleaner and combating the climate change. Equally, it's about innovation, it's about better user experience, and then many other things, competitiveness which come along. But then if we don't invest comparably into cybersecurity, we will just become collectively much more vulnerable. And then this is where, of course, if you talk to some business executives or including in the politics, policymakers, to get money into cyber, I mean, that's basically this is something what you can always postpone. I mean, okay, we do some advances here and there, but if we talk about cyber, okay, it's not visible at the start what the benefit is. Of course, when it is widely visible if something happens, but then of course it's already too late. And then there is some data what is up, what I from International Association of Mobile Operators, and they have estimated that by 2025 there will be some 25 billion devices connected to the internet. If we think of 5G, Internet of Things, all other stuff, so when I mean, it's 3 devices per person on Earth. So if we take global population being 8 billion roughly, so a huge step forward. And this is where we really need to make sure that also the technology and not only technology but also who is a provider of a technology is reliable. So that if we talk about, for example, 5G, so whoever is your network equipment provider, we need to be sure that this information, what is flowing through 5G network, or which is guiding the self-driving cars or the traffic management system, any other things, is absolutely secure, and you can trust that that equipment provider is not linked to the government, which has perhaps a different intention. So these are really important matters. And maybe my last point, and then we can do the conversation, is what we should then do, how we can be sure that a company or a country is paying sufficient attention on the cybersecurity. And what I have proposed about a year ago is to agree first on the methodology, what is going to be accounted for cyber security or cyber investment in a company or in a country. And then secondly, agree what is the right benchmark level. So how much, for example, from the IT budget needs to be invested in cybersecurity in order to be reasonably assured that if things go wrong, you have at least made your best effort, and then you can you can hopefully restore your systems or defend the attacks before they happen. So this methodology and the benchmark level is something that I think we really need a global agreement, given how fast and how rapidly the digital world is evolving and how much we actually depend on it. So I will stop here and would be happy to take a feedback and have a great conversation. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Minister Sutt. I was enjoyed hearing your perspective on this difficult but important challenge. I want to come back to a word you used early in your opening remarks: resilience. I'd like you to say a little bit more about what you mean by resilience.
I mean, for me, resilience is, in a very simple terms, that if you get hit, you don't fall, or at least, or even if you fall, you are able to stand up again. So, in a very simple terms, I mean, if, for example, in the financial industry, what I was dealing with a lot, I mean, for that you have a capital buffer. I mean, if losses occur, you can write it off, so the depositors' money is saved. So I think in a digital world, it's pretty much a similar thing. But if you have good systems, I mean, the first line of defense is a human behind the screen. I mean, this is where it all starts. Wrong link, wrong click, and off we go. So just investing in the basic cyber hygiene, it makes already a big step forward. I mean, it doesn't take billions. It just is a matter of attention, focus. Then, of course, sort of the bigger you are in terms of as a sort of, or the bigger your IT dependency is, I think the more then you need to really invest in processes, in technologies, and again in people, so that you would be able to face the cyber attack and have a proper tools. And I think then again, all the pen testing and other things that you play a war games, and this is, I think, also critically important part. And then maybe finally, it's not any companies or any country's individual matter. It's a global question how we collaborate. And sort of what is the focus and where we connect the like-minded countries, because I think fundamentally, if we talk about this century, it's also about a question of free and liberal world order versus state capitalism. And here, of course, the cyber is part of a warfare, if I may, and the resilience needs to be there.
Mm-hmm. Herb, let's get you involved. I know in the past you've talked about a tension between security and innovation. I'd love to hear your perspective on that tension.
Okay. I'm going to overstate it for emphasis here. So if anybody wants to challenge me on the intensity of my statement, we can discuss that. But as I say, I think innovation fundamentally is a detriment to cybersecurity. And to the extent that we prize innovation, which we do, in fact, we prize innovation above everything else, we're always going to be, in the long run, giving short to cybersecurity. Here's the reason. All of our desires about information technology are for it to do more for us. You want it to be faster, you want it to be smaller, you want it to be better in some way, more interoperable with with other things, talk to more systems, provide you more functionality, and so on. You want it to be better. So this is the sense in which people say software is eating the world. We have lots and lots and lots of applications that we didn't even know we needed. And they create new business markets and so on. All of that is all of that is positive and welcome. But to get more functionality out of your information technology systems, your systems have to become more complex because you have to write more code. Basically what happens is that your information technology systems become bigger and bigger and bigger and more complicated. So if you look at the number of lines of software that are required to fly and design and fly new airplanes and so on as a function of time, that line just goes up. It never goes down, and nobody will expects that number to go down. And every security person will tell you that complexity is the enemy of security. More things to go wrong, more places for some screw up to happen, more places for bugs to happen that the adversary can exploit, to take advantage of. Harder for you to understand, therefore you can't seal it off as well as you might otherwise be able to do. So in effect, as we have more and more complicated systems, as we demand more and more complicated systems, we don't call them, of course, we don't ask for more complexity, we ask for more functionality, but that's a code word for additional complexity. And the inevitable consequence of more complexity is diminished security. And as far as I can tell, there's only one solution to that, which is to stop asking for more. Now, I don't really mean that. I don't literally mean that. But what I do mean is to say that there is a trade-off between functionality and security. And if you want security, you're going to have to make some compromises on functionality. And that's compromising on innovation. So that means in the end, you're going to have to be willing to say, no, I'm not going to implement, I'm not going to ask for this fancy new functionality because the security risks are too high. And that conversation, as far as I can tell, doesn't happen. Because the only place that can happen is in the mind of the entrepreneur who never cares about security per se. The entrepreneur wants to bring to market a new function, something new, something that nobody has ever seen before. And cybersecurity is inherently a drag on that. And so you're stuck. And until the cybersecurity guy until the security people can push back on the CEO who says, I want this new functionality, it's going to be a losing game in the long run. That's the brief outline.
So I'd love to hear Minister Sutt's reaction to that. Let me briefly interject a response. So I don't disagree with your broad thesis, Herb, as you know. I do think that we have examples in the recent historical past where systems have become more complex and they become safer. And the intervening factor is liability, right? Where the individuals who are making decisions about risk bear the costs of their choices, right? And so as an example, you think about the emergence of tort liability in the United States after the Industrial Revolution, where you had this explosion of automation, of injury as a result of automation. And it basically took the emergence of a combination of tort liability, the idea of negligence, as well as some regulatory action by government to turn that balance. So the good news, I think, is, there are options, there are ways to intervene here to reduce risk. The bad news is it takes a really long time. So I use automobiles as an example, right? Where there's no question that automobiles today have both a lot more functionality than the Model T did 100 years ago, and that they're safer, right? It took, though, a fundamental shift in the way that that Americans valued safety, and especially the way that the courts and regulators viewed safety, and eventually cars got safer. You know, for example, in the 1950s, if you're a fan of American cars, you know that in the 1950s, cars had really sharp lines, like their shape had lots of pointy edges on it. That's super cool from an aesthetic perspective. But if you're a pedestrian and you get hit by one of those cars, you're impaled, right? And over time, you know, those design features changed, partly as a result of liability, right, for accidents. Minister Sutt, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, especially given your background in finance, where, you know, unlike many other sectors of the economy, when banks suffer, I mean, they literally lose dollars. There's a much more direct, link between adverse incident and pain.
I like the dynamic of our panel because it would be really boring if we all have the same opinion. So what I certainly agree with is a concept of a trade-off. I mean, you can, and I actually was also thinking of a cars to bring an example, but there is also from aviation what you can take, and this relates to basically helicopters, and then vertical takeoff and landing planes, which is pretty much similar to helicopter in terms of purpose and capability to move from point A to point B. And what I have been told by the industry experts, that these vitals, or vertical takeoff and landing planes, they are far more safer than helicopters, and they are, of course, technologically far more advanced, and I guess also more complex. But you Andy mentioned the banks. Yes, innovation in banking has always ended up with a mess, and in this, Herbert, you are perfectly right. That if deregulation, and again, this is sort of a banking-centric matter, but if a deregulation is done in a big bank, and then, well, in the beginning, life is always good because markets go only to one direction, and then, of course, direction changes, and we are where we are. But I think there is an opportunity or an option what one can use, and that is the concept of sandbox. Before going into wholesale or in a big grand scheme of things, you can test the complexity of the different solutions, their cyber resilience, in a sandbox which is immune to, or at least you keep most of the users immune. And then if you discover that, okay, these things actually don't work, we need to tweak here a little bit, something you do, and then at one point you can go to the real world once it is considered sufficiently safe. But I think we can't stop the clock. I mean, there is always somebody who innovates, and there is always somebody who picks it up. And I mean, for me, what is really important that we understand these risks. If we understand, then we can manage, and then we can sort of decide what is a level of risk. I, as a CEO, or I, as a sort of, or what the government or any agency can take, and that is much more, I think, prudent approach. Does it always work in practice? No. I mean, oftentimes things just go ahead, and like it was mentioned also by Herbert, I think. I mean, for a CEO, I mean, sales. This is what the company is expected to do, and then you, of course, try to get it as fast and as digital as possible. But this is also a point I made. We need really to raise this level of awareness. But look, I mean, if you take this path, if you innovate, great, but spend money also on protecting yourself.
Herb, go ahead.
Well, I think that, look, I mean, I think that the answer right now, the way the innovation ecosystem is structured, there are no disincentives to innovate. And one of the problems, so when Andy, you talked about liability, and as I'm sure we've talked, I've become a strong supporter of liability for software, for security crappiness.
That's a technical term, by the way.
That's right. That there needs to be something on the thumb, something on the other side of it that says that untrammeled innovation is not a good thing, because it leads to all of these cybersecurity problems. Now, I'm willing to negotiate the specific terms of what the scope and nature of that liability is. But to first approximation, there isn't any right now for information technology products and services. If there's security, that they notify you or something like that. I mean, it's not a big deal, and so the CEOs can just ignore it. Now, I want something that makes them think twice about innovation. I don't believe that untrammeled innovation is a good thing from a security standpoint, and I think we're starting to see the consequences of that. Now, that doesn't mean I want to shut it all down, but you can't go on like this if you want more secure systems.
Well, one lesson I think we've learned over and over again in the financial regulatory domain is when banks play with other people's money, they make decisions that are riskier than they might otherwise if they were playing with their own money.
Exactly.
So, right. And so, in finance, a trend certainly here in the United States has been to try to, either require or incentivize the banks to put, more skin in the game as the price of pursuing innovations, in their market space. And of course, that it can be difficult for government to keep up with that. But that's sort of you think about executive attestations about the accuracy of financial statements, right? You think about all the transparency requirements that have emerged over the decades. Minister Sutt, I mean, you were the deputy head of a central bank. I mean, and I have to imagine that you see, that experience colors your perspective on this domain. What is your sense of the incentive structure in the cybersecurity landscape?
I think it's a bit different. It's a bit different in a sense that there has been maybe too few big scale accidents. I mean, the history of banking is long and rich, and there are tons of accidents. What people know, so the regulation has developed over time. How much we should regulate the cyber security domain, I think, is a great question. Perhaps what I said at the end, to agree on the methodology and set the benchmark, would be sort of one step forward. Because then you can, and if you accompany it with the disclosure requirements in annual statements, then you create some sort of a structure. Then, of course, there is always endless debate. What's the right level of investment as a percentage of IT budget or any other reference? But that is then a different debate. I mean, if we know that we can compare apples and apples, not apples and oranges, because we have methodology. And then we can work based on the sort of experience and evidence we have at hand. And as I said, I am new kid on the block. So in my understanding, the cyber world has become much more hostile over past couple of maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 years, and or say more widespread also in scope, and we will have increasingly more sort of players in the society who have been faced with cyber crime or or cyber attack. And that, I think, also helps to raise the level of awareness. And again, if we talk about really small companies, SMEs, I mean, it's more about from where they do buy the services rather than, I mean, there is no point to set up the cyber team in a company of 10 people. I mean, it doesn't really work that way. But when it comes to the government policies, to public administration, to bigger companies, I think, and also for banks, there is already a regulation. So on operational risk. So I think we should perhaps a bit look more broadly. But certainly, I don't want to over-regulate and say, look, now you need to we box it all in, and you need to stay within this box. Then we get it most certainly wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the measurement challenges once again emerge here, where if you think of an area like banking, we can measure losses, dollars, right? We can come up with various metrics on capital requirements and other sort of metrics that we're able to say capture or mitigate some degree of risk. That's a lot harder to do when it comes to cybersecurity risk. And for a long time now, we've sort of been kind of caught in this position where oftentimes, because of measurement challenges, governments have either, on the one hand, perhaps overreached with requirements that are so broad and vague that they leave the government with a huge amount of discretion that could be abused. I think of China's cybersecurity law as an example there. In other cases, governments really kind of groping or searching for some middle ground that respects the fact that different organizations face different risks, and overly prescriptive approaches can just become kind of compliance exercises that don't result in real security improvements. On the other hand, sometimes compliance exercises yield results, and so there's just a balance there that we struggle to find. For me, I always come back to, patch your systems, use multi-factor authentication, and use a password manager. And that's true for individuals. I think it's good advice for organizations, and, for organizations in particular that aren't doing those three things at a bare minimum, I would suggest are not meeting their cybersecurity obligations. And, but that's a pretty low bar, right? Herb.
I suggest that the difference between Andres and me is that he's talking about tactical response to us, which is what regulations focus on. You shall do X and Y, and I'm talking about a strategic response, which is what liability does. What we need is a change in mindset, not a change. Well, sorry, I was going to say something which is patently false. I was going to say that we don't need a change in tactics. No, we do need a change in tactics too. And all of the things that Andre said about sandboxing and so on and testing, and all those things are absolutely right. Okay, and even the idea that you want to create funds that are dedicated to spending on cybersecurity and that's all those things are absolutely the right things to do, and they will make a difference. There's no question about that in my mind. Okay. But none of it changes. I mean, to me, the underlying fundamental global issue is that we're asking for it. We're asking for more. We're in effect asking for systems that are less secure in our quest for innovation, in our unlimited quest for innovation. And until you can get somebody who's willing to sacrifice some measure of innovation for security, you're not going to get anywhere. And that's why I'm a proponent of liability in this context of some form, precisely because it puts some brakes on innovation. Are there consequences to that? Of course there are. But one of the positive consequences that will be that you'll get people to pay more attention to cybersecurity. I mean, this is the information technology industry has been fighting liability for a very long time, very successfully, by saying you'll stifle innovation. And everybody said, oh, well, if that's the case, then we don't want to do it. Well, I say, bring it on.
Liability looks different in many ways if we're talking about nation state activity, where historically we've sort of expected governments to really step up and be sort of the primary defender and frankly absorber of risks. And I want to ask Minister Sutt, I mean, how the current war and security crisis has affected Estonia's strategy for cybersecurity. Does Estonia feel, has this, conflict resulted in any shifts in thinking? And if so, love to hear them. And if not, would also love to hear.
We also love to hear it, right?
Go ahead.
No, it certainly has shifted the thinking, or maybe it has sped up the thinking and activities, because first, as I think everybody knows, we are all tested 24/7, 365. Every time there is somebody testing if a door is locked. And then it goes back to these three basic principles, what you and Andy mentioned about the whole password, simple stuff, the password management, and so on, so forth. But equally, I think what Ukraine or the war, the aggression in Ukraine has demonstrated is how interlinked everything is. If you look at electricity, or all critical services, what society needs to function, they also depend on ICT and cyber. So if for some it might have been a theoretical concept while ago, it's clearly obvious now that you actually need your systems being resilient. You need them to be tested. And as I mentioned, it's really important that the communication infrastructure is up and running. Also for, if we talk, for example, about not necessarily war conditions, but if there is a natural disaster, are you actually prepared to as a country then, or as a county or a municipality to deal with, to have the communication systems in place, or protocols in place? Yeah, these things are also tested, but I think the war in Ukraine has really made, I think, world very much black and white, that you can't sort of ignore the fact that cyber domain is just one of the conventional domains, and you need to invest more. If we talk, for example, legacy systems, clearly something we have, and we are been speeding up the replacement of some of those. So, and we have also been investing into coordination between different government agencies, including the defense forces, which have their own cyber units, so that you basically leverage the capabilities, not by building individual capability in each and every administration authority, but you pull the forces together and leverage up. I think it clearly has directed a lot of strategic thinking how to prepare, which again for me is very similar to what we did in regulating the banks. So all the war games, the stress tests are precisely. I see there actually a lot of similarities in the two fields, but of course, with the big difference being that in banking okay, you at least think that your metrics are right, but then of course, in due course, it turns out that at least some of the metrics were missing or wrong. But in cyber, it's so diverse, and you have, and also it's disproportionate. The amount of money you need to attack versus the amount of money you need to defend. I mean, it's like miles apart. And it is really cheap to go for a ransomware and as you sort of, or attacks against the supply chains where you can do a lot of harm. And then maybe last point is really raising this level of awareness at the level of CEOs. I mean, this is really important because, and this I think for me it's a strategic, because there has to be acknowledged. These risks have to be acknowledged. And then, for example, one small thing, and that now doesn't really relate to CEOs directly, but more of a broader public. In Estonia, there is every morning there is a report about the travel accidents and how many drivers under influence have been caught. So we have been now starting to send also every morning out the report on the cyber events over the last 24 hours. Certainly not yet as popular as a traffic announcements, but I think these are like small steps to see how we can raise this level of awareness. And again, in ideal world, you need small accident which deserves or draws a lot of attention. In the real world, again, oftentimes these accidents are not small before they turn sufficient attention.
Well, Herb, go ahead, jump in.
Andres, I'm fascinated by what you said, because I haven't seen, I mean, people have been trying to create awareness for a long time. And what I'd like to ask, what incentives are you giving CEOs and innovators to pay attention to cybersecurity? And I think that I was listening very carefully to what you said, and I didn't hear any. What did I miss something there?
No, you didn't. You didn't miss. But then, well, look. They also need to do their job with a due care and with a fiduciary duty. I think that at the end of the day is the responsibility of a CEO. And the cyber is just one domain of a risk they have to take care of. Like they do operational risks, they do financial risks, how they pick suppliers. I mean, supply chain management these days is equal. I mean, what is the incentive, if I may ask in return? So what is incentive for the CEO to manage the supply chain risk? So what is the reward structure?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's
a good question.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question.
I can't point to one.
Well,
and that's my point. That is fundamentally my point. There are no incentives to do security other than to pass regulatory compliance requirements. That's the point. Until you give people large-scale incentives to do this, cybersecurity is always going to be last. Or any other security for that. I'm not picking on cybersecurity in particular.
Yeah, but this is where we probably are a bit in a different corners of a scale, which is great. I mean, I'm not saying that what you say is not right or is wrong. The question is, what are the means? And that we.
And right.
Well, let me jump in real fast. This is we have a question from the audience that gets at this question. It's from Anna Maria Usalu, who's one of our visiting fellows from Estonia here at Stanford. So her question is, we're advocating for more investment in cybersecurity, but then how does one convince countries to do this, given that countries, also have all sorts of, priorities that they are trying to sort of juggle, whether that's healthcare, social services, things like that. And then I think the same question could be asked for companies too. And by the way, the Q&A is open, so if others have questions, don't be shy. The button is as Michael Keller said at the top, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, it's the Q&A icon. Minister Sutt, what do you, by way of incentives? I mean, what is your perspective?
Look, in Estonia, we are obsessed a bit, maybe sometimes too much, about different league tables. So where Estonia ranks in different scoreboards. What would incentivize the government or governments around the world is, I think, a shared understanding. A shared understanding that on its own, the cybersecurity as a challenge is not going to disappear. As I said, if we keep investing trillions globally in ITC and we are not investing in cybersecurity, we will pay again collectively pretty high ticket. So I think there has to be this understanding that it's not, and that's why I call it investment in cybersecurity, because optically and mentally these things differ. Is it an expense or is it investment? For me, it is investment because you make your country or your business more resilient. Is there a trade-off between investment in cybersecurity and wages of teachers, wages of hospital workers? Yes, there is. That is always a political trade-off. But this is where we then need to be clear and transparent. That if we don't do X, Y, Z, then we are also knowingly taking the risk that our hospitals might be down, like it happened in Ireland. And this is, I think, we just need to be more transparent and more vocal about the risks and spread the information. Is it politically easy? No. If I would be if I would be a minister for healthcare, well, he would probably say that yes, cybersecurity is important, but even more important are the wages for healthcare workers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's. I mean, so it comes back to the incentives problem, and obviously, that what that problem looks like is going to vary by sector. It's going to vary by, are we talking about, individual consumers and the incentives that they face versus the vendors of technology versus, companies who operate IT who are themselves or customers. The transparency point, I think, is especially important, and that seems to be sort of the next phase in at least in the United States, the evolution of regulatory policy, where we see, for example, the Securities and Exchange Commission has proposed rules to mandate more cybersecurity disclosure, incident disclosure, with above and beyond what it's required in the past, to enable investors to make more informed investment decisions about what companies they invest in based on that company's cyber risk exposure. In the past, there's sort of been a materiality requirement, but the SEC is proposing basically eliminate that requirement. Just any significant incident to be defined needs to be reported to at least to the SEC. And there's legislation that President Biden signed some weeks ago that would sort of do the same for much of critical infrastructure. So we have a couple minutes left before we wrap up. I do want to come back to Minister Sutt with a question about collaboration among Baltic countries. I'd love to hear a little bit from you on how Estonia views partnerships with Latvia, Lithuania, when it comes to cybersecurity.
we are all here, not only in the Baltics, but globally in the same boat or the same ship or around the same table. Everybody who cares about Western democracy, free world. I mean, cybersecurity is part of resilience in the free world. Where in the practical level, there is a very good cooperation between CERTs, cyber emergency response teams, and not only in Europe or in the Baltics. I was with a team in Israel last week, and we had very good conversations about what is happening in their cyberspace, what type of attacks, and it's the pattern is all the same, and so are the state-sponsored attackers. So I think this sort of at the level of cyber teams, in my take, collaboration is actually very good, and the information is flowing. There we should do more is at the political level, so that we get the cyber really as a topic on the agenda, or if there are different briefs, then the cyberspace should also be covered. Again, I think this is something what, in my take, is evolving. It's increasingly recognized. So we just need to get the balance now right, that we actually can deliver something tangible also in strategic approach, like Herbert mentioned, so that we don't sort of stop innovation because we can't handle the complexity, but rather we frame it in a way that, look, if you want to have more complex systems, you need also to answer how you are not going down in security, and then I think world is going to be a better place, as it always has become, because of innovation. So you see, I'm a strong believer in innovation, so that is what I can do.
Well, I think that is a perfect optimistic.
For the record, I am too. But
Well, so on that optimistic note, I'm going to bring us to our conclusion. Minister Sutt, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Evening your time. Herb, it's great as always to see you, to Stanford Libraries, to Mike Keller, Lisi Essay, Sonia Lee, the team who helped put this together. Thank you very much. And I wish all of our audience members a lovely remainder of your Monday.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the discussion and having me.